Yeah, both. All right, so moving on to where we are going to go now. Give me a couple minutes here. You know, we're still kind of in the early part of the class, still kind of trying to get used to some of the routines of the class. And, you know, we've got something today I kind of want to run through with you. We'll be doing this at different times throughout the semester and throughout the year. So once again, just kind of trying to show you what these routines would be. The first thing would be, and I mentioned this to you, I think, last week, I do live stream my classes. We were having a few bugs with that, but I've gotten those worked out now, and we're actually streaming right now. So the webcam in the back is it's got y'all, got the class going right now. And if you were home and you were sick, or if you knew you had to miss a day, you chimed into YouTube. Sarah, show us again. That's what you would see. There's about a 2 to 3 second delay. And if you were home and you were sick, there you go. All right. So, I mean, the idea, again, I feel like this is going to help in really 2 situations. One, if you're absent, you're going to be able to chime in either in the time or later on and be able to see what we've talked about. But also, I think it's a good review tool. They will always be listed as the class and as the day. And, you know, sometimes they may just be instructions on something that we're doing. Other times, like today, it might actually be information that's being shared with you. But the link for that is on the U.S. History page, which, you know, it's on that link that I've always got at the bottom. And you can pop up there. It'll be recorded. It'll also give you a live stream of the class. So please be aware of that tool. I think it will certainly be useful for you. Beyond that, this is where we're going today and here. There will be times in this class over a typical unit that might be 2 to 3 weeks long. There will be times where we will have a little bit in the way of notes. I am not going to note you to death. I don't want to do that. I don't think that's going to be worthwhile to you. But I do think that from time to time, notes are necessary. I think it's a good skill for everybody to have, not just in this class or this year, but next year. And then if you're going on to college or university, there's still going to be a lot of times where you're going to have something written down that has been shared with you. Okay, so I think there's some skill in that, being able to know what it is that you need to write down versus what is just extra. That skill needs to be developed. Beyond that, I honestly just use this as a time when I need to get some information to you. All right, we have taken the past couple of days, we have focused on Native Americans. Now I want to talk about the Europeans that are settling. And then we will wrap this up tomorrow by looking at when the 2 groups collide and what happens at that moment. All right, so what I want to do today is to share a little bit about these Europeans. It's always about just establishing a foundation of information that we can build off of with more in-depth work. All right? When we have these days, and when we have days when we take notes, every single time I will build those notes around what I call essential questions. All right? These are the keys. by the end of the day, by the end of the discussion, you ought to be able to answer these questions. And if you can, then you are in good shape. All right? If you cannot, then we need to go over it some more, and I need to answer those questions in a better way. I will always share those with you on the website. It'll say, like, Unit 1, S1 for Seminar 1, key questions. And you can open those up and make a copy, and you can just put some notes in or try to answer the questions directly on the Google Doc. If you're an old school pen and paper person like I was, that's fine too. I'm not going to collect in any way, shape, or form these essential questions. They are purely for your benefit. But since most of you don't have your Chromebooks, today's essential questions, I went ahead and printed off. I'm going to send around the questions, and again, use them as you will. I think most people would be smart to maybe have some notes on the back or answering the questions as we go. But again, these are purely going to be for your benefit. But here's the deal. When I give you some notes, I expect you to be writing some of this stuff down. All right, it's going to be good for you because when we do have a test, those tests are going to be largely built out of this kind of information. The way that I look at a test in this class is that it is just to cover the basic information. Can you answer questions about the basic information? That's kind of what we cover in these notes, the base information. But more than that, honestly, it's just good old-fashioned disrespectful for you to sit out there and not make any effort to write a few things down, especially when I give you essential questions, especially when I've got a visual up here that I think should focus what you need to know. All right, so make sure that you're putting that effort in. Now, what are we going to do with these notes? Well, obviously, you'll need them for tests. Obviously, they will be important for other things that we do in here. But one thing I can promise you is that we are not going to take quizzes. We may have quizzes like you just took, but that's going to probably be on something that you have worked on separately, just to make sure that you pulled out of that assignment or group work the information that I think you need to know. So what we're going to do with these notes in the immediate sense is that we're going to harness the use of social media as a learning tool in here, notably Twitter. Okay? I know a lot of you are already on Twitter, and if you're not, I am going to ask that you create an account, and if you only follow me, that's fine. Your grades on these will not in any way be based on the number of followers you have on Twitter. All right? That has nothing to do with it. All you're doing with this is when we finish up a discussion like those that we will have today, I want you to go back to what you put together, your notes, and I want you to find what you believe to be a key point in that discussion. It could be a name, place, date, could be just a really key point that you think we covered. And I want you to compose a tweet around it. You're not going to write me a book. You don't have that many characters. It's going to be a one sentence, one point. And you're going to tweet it out. Now, if you want to tweet at me, that's fine, but you're going to use up characters. The only thing that needs to be in this tweet is that, number one, it has to be factually correct. If we're doing this during World War II and you tweet out, Ronald Reagan was president of the United States during World War II, that's a problem. It's just plumb incorrect. Right? So it's got to be factually accurate. You've also got to have the correct hashtag. I am not going to follow you on Twitter. So for those of you that were eager to jump on Twitter and tweet out, Mr. Klein is awful, you're fully safe in doing it. I'm not going to follow. What I'm going to do when I go to grade these is I'm going to go to the hashtag, and that's where I need to see your tweets. Okay, we're going to have a hashtag here. It's a little bit long, and I apologize for that, but I want to make sure that we own it, that it's not a combination of U.S. history students and somebody trying to sell Ray-Ban sunglasses. Okay? I want it to just be us. So we're going to go hashtag FHS, US, P for period, and in our case will be P6. All right, I will try to have these up whenever we do these, just as a reminder. But that's what I'm going to grade these, and it is 10 points a time. All right, so I mean, let's be honest. If you forget one, is that the end of the world? No, it's 10 points. But if you decide not to contribute time after time, it's 10 points each time. That's going to add up really fast. Right? It's not meant to be a difficult grade. What it is meant to do is so that whenever you go to that hashtag, you're going to see everybody's tweets. And if everybody does it correctly, we're going to have a study guide. Study guide on Twitter. And let's be honest, most of you are on Twitter all the time anyway. So if there's something like tests coming up or something like that, you ought to be able to jump over there to that hashtag and get a quick study guide, a quick review of things that we have covered in this class. That's the reason we're doing it. It's out there. Most people are using it. Most of the students are using it. Let's use it in here as a tool. Are there any questions on this? Okay. Don't forget about that. So today, I'll give a couple days on this. I usually give 24 hours for this to get posted. Today, a little bit different. It's the first time we're doing it. But there will be a 10-point grade associated with that tweet after today's discussion. So be mindful of that. Also, by the way, I get often asked, what can I do for extra credit? I talked about the extra journals that you could do. We'll have another one of those tomorrow. A lot of times I like to just throw out a review question, random times. Sometimes it's during the day. A lot of times it's during the evening. It's never going to be at like 3 in the morning. Okay? But it's going to be real simple. I shoot it out there. First student to tweet back at me with the correct answer, you get a point of extra credit. And I usually like to try to throw a lot of them out there. You can get up to 10 points of extra credit by answering those every 9 weeks. This is where a lot of students sometimes will turn on those notifications. These will always come from that @KleinsClassroom Twitter handle. I told you that would be the one to turn notifications on. That way you know when I tweet it. Hopefully you can get back to me in time. If you don't, the worst thing is you're out of a point of extra credit, but you're getting the review questions. Any questions on using social media and using Twitter, what we're going to do in here? Yeah. For the extra credit? Oh, for the actual grade, it's only when we have those. Only when we have those. It's not going to be once a day. Okay. Any other questions? All right, so then let's get to the discussion itself. I don't know that we're going to get this finished. We're sure going to try. Now, when we have these kinds of discussions, what I will do is just by hitting a button, I can change the screen that you saw on Sarah's computer, where you actually saw everybody, you saw me. I can change it so that it only shows what's on the projection screen. So if Sarah were to go to that now, she would see this projection screen. And that way, if you're using it for review, you're not going to have to try to squint and see from there back here to what I've got up on the board. All right, so don't worry about that. All right, talk about that. All right, so the way that I approach this class, I kind of approach it like we're telling a story. And anytime you're reading a story, there has to be some kind of logical place to start. Right now, we're doing sort of a quick review of early American history. I mean, really early Native Americans. And I feel like, those are really the two groups to know at this point of the story. Early Native Americans and Europeans who are coming over here and who are building settlements that will eventually become colonies, that will eventually become states, that will eventually become the United States. So that's where we're at. It's just making sure we remember this early part of the story. It's been a long time since 8th grade U.S. history. And in order to start this part of the story, we actually need to step all the way back to 1453. Ways back, but that's where the story has to start. Now, I'm guessing that most of you have taken some form of world history, some kind of world geography in your time. And when you did, you probably heard about something called the Crusades. Can that ring a bell to anybody? The Crusades. Yes, no? No, not at all? No? Ring a bell? All right. Oh, hopefully it does. It's kind of a big deal. But if you remember, the Crusades were a series of wars fought between Christians and Muslims. And initially they were fought so that they could control the city of Jerusalem. But by 1453, nobody really cared about Jerusalem anymore. It had become much more a fight, less about religion and more just about power. And what we saw in 1453 was the final crusade, the last one. And it saw the Muslim forces coming out as the winners. But I can tell you that there wasn't a whole lot of concern about religion in this war. It was all about power. We've got a map here that would have been pretty accurate as of 1453. Now you've got Africa here, or I'm sorry, Africa, Asia, Europe here. What do we call this stretch of land? Initials ME. Middle East. All right? So Saudi Arabia, Israel would be here. I mean, that's the heartland for these Muslim forces. All right, now by 1453, they control all of that region. They're starting to head north, and they have their eyes on a city located right here between Europe and the Middle East. It's a city known as Constantinople. Now, I think it's safe to say that in 1453, Constantinople was the most important city in the world. I don't feel like I'm saying something crazy to throw that out there. The reason why it was so important is because it was the doorway. It was the gateway between Europe and Asia for trade to go back and forth. Let me tell you, by 1453, these folks in Europe were addicted to the stuff that was coming over from India and China. Spices, silk, tea, I mean, all of these sort of luxury items that nobody had to live with. I mean, it's kind of like Wi-Fi. You can live without it, but life is better with it. That's kind of like the stuff coming over from Asia. And they are addicted to it. And they have a pretty open route of trade. It's this red trade route here, going back and forth. Anybody know what that route was called? Silk Road. Very good. Next. So this is a good thing, and it's gone on for hundreds of years. In 1453, the Muslim forces take control of Constantinople, and they shut that doorway. No longer is Europe going to just be able to follow the Silk Road and trade with India and China. And so now they've got two choices. Choice number one, give it all up, I guess. Life won't be as exciting, but we're going to have to just give up everything. That's choice number one. Choice two, if the eastern way to get there is closed, let's see if there's another way to get to India and China. Let's go a different direction. That's the option that Europe decides to go. And the first country in Europe to try this is where we start to bring the United States into the story. The first country to try to do this is Portugal. All right, Portugal is ruled by a guy named Prince Henry. Prince Henry is so committed to sailing and trying to find a way to get to India and China by sending boats out to explore that he gets the nickname Prince Henry the Navigator. He sends out a number of different exploratory groups to try and find this other way to get to India and China. Shows on the map here, these are the big three of these expeditions. And you can see it goes from purple to gold to green, that each time he sends a group out, they get a little bit further. Let me tell you what, if you looked at a map of Africa in 1453, people in Europe knew that it was there. They just didn't know how big it was. If you looked at a map, what you would see is this giant chunk of land and then water surrounding it. And usually that water was filled with drawings of like dragons and sea monsters. I mean, that's what these folks thought. If we go too far south, one of two things will happen. We will either sail off the earth because it must be flat, or some dragon's going to eat us, apparently. It was a simpler time back then. But Prince Henry is so determined to get silk and tea, apparently, that he's willing to brave the dragons. So he sends these guys out. The first guy, and this would be the gold path or the middle path, is Bartholomew Diaz. This is 1488. This is before Columbus. Right? He's going to send this guy out. He's going to make his way down. And as you can see, along his voyage, he will discover two things. Number one, no dragons. But secondly, and most importantly, there is a bottom point in Africa, something that we can sail around. Now, he runs out of supplies and has to go back, but a few years later, he's going to send somebody else out, Vasco da Gama. This guy will make his way around and actually get to India and China. This is huge. I mean, guys, listen, we're not going to talk about Portugal ever again in this class. Like, this is their moment to shine. For a few years, Portugal will be the wealthiest nation in Europe. Not England, not France, not Spain. It's going to be Portugal. Why? Because they found another way to get to India, to get to China, to keep that trade going. Listen, if you're in Europe and you want tea, you want silk, you want spice, now who do you have to go through for all of that? Portugal. They're the man. I mean, other countries are going to want to get on board with this. The first one's going to be Spain. They're right next door to Portugal, for goodness sake. But Spain's got a few issues they've got to work out first. All right, the first issue is that they actually have to get some freedom. Up until, while Portugal is doing all of this stuff, Spain's fighting to become free. They're under the control of a group called the Moors. Not Spanish, they're not Spanish at all. A group of people known as the Moors, and the Moors are quite simply Muslims that live in Spain. So this would have been a map of Spain around the same time that the Crusade is going on, and Constantinople's getting shut down, Portugal's building themselves up. This is Spain. This area in the green down here, that's where the Muslims are in control. And what we're going to see is that as we get into the 1400s, the Spaniards are going to sweep down, kick the Muslims out. This is called Reconquista, or the Reconquest. And now we have an actual Spain. And they're going to spend the next almost 100 years just trying to rebuild themselves and trying to make some money and become a power again in the world and in Europe. And at that time, the surest way to do that, try to find a way to get to India and China, just like Portugal did, and start to get involved in that trade again. But here's the deal. They can't go east. That's closed off. They can't go south. Portugal has already got that. North, well, that seems awfully cold. So the only where to go is to head our direction. And that's a big problem. You see, Europeans knew Africa was there. They had no idea what was this direction. You look at the same map and all you see over here is water and more dragons. I mean, you sailed this direction, you literally had no idea what you were going to run into, if anything. That's what the famous Spanish explorer in 1492, who am I talking about here? Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue, nurse you around. That's what he is dealing with when he takes off. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about Columbus because, he didn't really do a lot of positive things. Let's just be honest. All right. He sails 3 ships over here. Anybody remember the names of those 3 ships? There you go. Nina Pinta, Santa Maria. Sails them over here. Makes landfall. He's convinced he's in India. So everybody he meets, he calls an Indian. Obviously, he's not there. And, you know, after a while, he comes to that realization himself. Hey, this probably isn't India. So he claims it for Spain. You got to love this. Literally, you just take a Spanish flag and throw it into the ground and say, "This is Spain's." I guess that's all it takes. You know? And the island that he lands on, if any of you have ever been to the Dominican Republic, gone down on vacation, that's where he lands. I mean, it's an island called Hispaniola, shares Dominican Republic and Haiti today. That's where Columbus lands. There's going to be a couple more expeditions led by Columbus before the guy dies, but that's going to establish Spain as the power here. You know, we're actually going to end this here for today. I'll finish up tomorrow. I need about 10 minutes tomorrow. But where we leave things today is that Portugal controls the route to Asia, but Spain has stumbled on this whole new world. And who knows what kind of riches they're going to be able to find here. Tomorrow, I'll say just a few more things about Spain. I'll have a little bit on England and France, and that'll be it. And then we'll move on to something else. Thank you. That's up to you. You can, or you could do it. Correct. That has to be from the discussion. Yeah, that's French adventure, but not for a while. Actually, there was somebody that was going on about when Haiti got hit by that hurricane. That was because they had rebelled against France and God was against them. Nonsense like that. Woo. All right, we good here? All right. Yeah, hey, if you want to wait to tweet till tomorrow when we're completely done, that's fine too.
No, she has etymology this semester. But
drive is Ferrari.
I took over comprehension and over here. No.
I mean, if I had Ferrari, I would let him.
Roll out off butts.
Roll out, baby.
Hey, no, you've got at least 2 full years of my bad jokes. Hopefully, you know, it's never foggy. I would hate for you to miss anything that Come on, good? Foggy mess. It's not funny, but it's fine. I don't mind the occasional. You should have seen him. I was your age, I did too. Wow. I don't remember this one. Right, Bishop. I wish Sydney would be more like Sebastian. Sebastian, are you guys going to make another great run so I can write some more great? Sorry, yeah, I'm trying to convince Brownston to let me just announce all of them. I drove past the house the other day, going into Ellick. It had a Franklin Davis.
Yeah, it's my aunt.
Okay.
They live in Virginia, but they just bought
Bye, everybody. What?
Write it down.
Burn it down. Man, it's warm. Especially a class this size. This is. Could just be me. Maybe I just need to leave. JK. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. What's up, man? It's hot here, dude. It's hot. Cameron, have you gone here your whole time? You moved in here at any point? We're not going to relive those days, are we? Huh? Right, I know. I don't know. No, that's actually cooled it down a little bit. It was, believe it or not, worse than this. Yeah. I mean, you feel it as soon as you walk in. You know? You think it feels good in here?
It's too warm every time I'm cold.
I was freezing cold.
It does not feel good in this.
I finished it.
Okay, hold on. You can use that one. What are you doing? What are you doing? You came from Madison Grant? You know, there's another Mr. Klein over there. Yeah. I doubt you would have known him. He thought he teaches where the junior, the high school kind of goes over to the junior high, those doors. There's kind of the classroom up in the corner. Oh, yeah. That's where he teaches. Like that. Yeah. He's something else. You probably you know Mr. Smith over there. His wife, that's what he knows. Yeah, down the junior high. Play baseball, man? I'm moving. I think Dad coached baseball for a long time with City Riggs. There's new coach there. Dad retired. He coached basketball. He coached girls basketball. Well, that's okay. That's okay. Just hold on to it because I'm getting ready to pass them back. Woo! It's warm.
This is what happens. Your parents tell you you're not allowed to have your phone in your bag, but you just
Yeah, I'm not.
Well, can we transfer the hair into here? It's a little unbalanced. Just make capture some of Brock's hair. You don't want to walk back in, do you?
I feel like if had a legitimate wooden door, this is what it would feel
I
like.
walked in and I go, oh my God, I wonder if this is what.
I may be teaching like this. I'm afraid to raise my arms.
It's okay, just let it go.
No, I'm not
You
doing
don't
it.
start singing Frozen. It's hot in here. At least it's not cold, like freezing cold.
I would rather have that. I'll take the freezing cold.
Listen, we are. I am beginning to put on my layers for once, but we can't take off our layers here. Okay. I am in the meeting of legislature. I'm getting out. This one's everyone. Let's see it.
Bell ring.
I got a 48. I got 48% on my post.
All right, folks, listen up. In all seriousness, I apologize for the heat. I get it. Believe it or not, it feels better now than it did earlier, if that's possible. And no, it's not because the windows are open. That's what's brought a little bit of cool air in here. It's raining, so it's cooled down a little bit. But we're just going to have to deal with it. I called down to the front office this morning, and I said, you know, it's just really hot in here. What can we do? And apparently, the air conditioning runs on one computer, which is password protected, and only one person knows the password. And that password guy is not here today. And so here we are, sweating. But somehow the front office has all the cool air. I'm not saying,
It's
you know,
usually cool in the front.
but whatever. You know, it's funny how that worked out.
Yeah, right.
So, all right, so here's our plan for today. First things first, we need to get this quiz done. I'm going to hand back the sheets from yesterday. You're able to use those on the quiz. And I can tell you, I've looked at student scores over the course of the day. You probably talked to your classmates. If you did this right, you got this filled in, this is going to be super easy for you. If you didn't, yeah, we're about there, you know. So. You got the Anastasia?
Oh, damn. I'm talking about damn. Because like some arrows get yeah, not me. I'm wearing black leggings.
Luckily, I decided not to wear my black leggings.
Your body is black.
See, John left his black leggings at home as well.
I think every guy should wear a pair of black leggings at least once.
I've got the I've got like money.
We should have a gender bender day. That they do during homecoming. Where we all
All right. You still have it? Okay, so we're gonna need all right, so quiz is a multiple choice. It's one of those quizzes that I would have rather you taken on the computer, but we don't have that capability, so we're taking it on paper. But it's just a print off of a Google form. Just fill in the dot next to the answer that is correct, and that's all you got to do. Couple things on quiz and test etiquette. Anytime we have something like this, obviously no talking, and that includes after you've turned your paper in. I will let you know when everybody is done at that point, then you can talk. But up to that point, if I see your mouth moving, I have to assume you're cheating. If you've got a question of any kind, even if it's, hey, can I borrow a pencil? Ask me. Don't ask your neighbor. Don't get caught in that type of situation. Right? When you're done, both the handout that I just gave back to you and the quiz need to go in the basket in the back. Come back and sit quietly. Right? All right, let's go.
I'm going to show you the resource that I have that might be helpful. This is the web page. Taking the live stream. You'll start. Click on that. It's a live stream, so they have students access. But also it saves that. So it's a resource that like right now is live stream. There's a couple things like it's a resource. Yeah, I mean, I can get it done. I'd like to come back today, because I'm gonna start some stuff. That's the reason. So there's no way to do that all. It's a mess. So, that's fine. Use close it down.
Over on the left side. Left side. There's a little knob up there at the top. You gotta pull. Cole, can you help? Open the right door, and then there's a knob. There you go. Thank you, Cole.
Go to the hospital page.
All right, is everybody done? I heard it. I don't know what that means. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on now. By this point, everybody's got, or at least everybody but Colt, has got the quiz done. You know, I kind of feel like we can move on now. I've got the scaffold reminder of what we're doing up here. You know, as I said a couple days ago, scaffold is all about building each day one on top of the other. Each day is going to bring us another layer of what we are talking about. So the big question that I gave you, I think it was like Friday of last week, was, you know, what was the relationship between Native Americans and the Europeans who settled here in the earliest period of American history? At this point, we have looked at the early Native Americans, and now today, I want to switch our focus to the Europeans, to that side of the story. All right? And before we get started here, there's a couple of routines that I want to make you aware of. We're still at that point, I think, in class that we need to know those routines. And from time to time when you're in here, we will have some notes. It won't be remotely every day. In fact, I would guess over the course of a typical unit that might run 2 to 3 weeks, we might do this like twice, okay? But my whole idea with notes is really 2 things. Number one, I still think it's a skill that you guys need to have some experience with. Not just while you're here, but those of you that are thinking of going on to college or university, I promise you, you're still going to have to be able to write some stuff down that is shared with you. I know that the Caden sisters, he's got one in college, he's got one that just graduated. I guarantee you, Kelsey and Katie had to take some notes from time to time, right? Colt's got a sister in college now, she's going to have to take some notes. Being able to know what to write down, what not to write down, is a pretty crucial skill. But more than that, there are honestly just times I've got to just share some information with you. I got to put some information out there and set a foundation of knowledge, and that's kind of what I look at as notes. It's the base information, all right? But it's information that you need to know, and it's information that's going to show up on tests. If we have a test in this class, it's the same idea. It's testing you on the base information that I expect you to know. And a lot of that is going to come from the few notes that we do have. Now, when you come in and you see seminar up here, that's what we're going to do. And anytime we have something like this, I will always build the notes around a few essential questions, key questions. Now, if you can answer these questions when we're done, then you've got what you need. Anything else you have on top of that, just a cherry on top. You've got what you need. Now, what I will do is I will share those questions with you in the form of a Google Doc. All right? I know that a lot of you don't have your devices. I've got Riley helping me out. She's hopefully on the website now on the U.S. History page. Are you on the U.S. History page? All right. So if Riley looks up in the top right corner, she'll see Files, and she should see something that says Unit 1, S1, Key Questions. Yes? She's nodding her head yes. All right? When she opens that up, it's going to be a Google Doc that you can make a copy of. And, if that's something that you want to use to take some notes, just answer the questions as we go. Absolutely. All right? Now, since most of you don't have your devices today, I went ahead and just printed them off for you. I'm going to send those around. Grab a copy of that as you go. If you have your device, go ahead and just use that if you want. This is just something to get us through. Again, we're just kind of doing the best that we can with what we've got. Okay? But the notes are all about how it will work best for you. I was more of a paper and pencil guy. I liked writing down what the teacher said. That may be how you work, and if that's the case, that's fine. If you like the key questions, use those. I'm not going to pick these up or collect them. They're purely for your benefit. The only thing I will say is this. When I give you notes, I expect you to be out there making an effort to write some of this stuff down. All right? If you don't, it's pretty disrespectful to me. But honestly, more than anything, it just hurts you guys. We will have tests in this class. They will be worth, a fair amount of points. This is what the test will be written at. This is the base information to know. The tests are, they're going to test you on that information. So make sure that you're giving yourself a tool that you can go back and study. Speaking of tools that can help you to study, you may remember that I said something last week about how I live stream my classes. Right. Now, we had a few bugs in that system. I have got those worked out. And if Riley clicks on the link that says Mr. Klein's YouTube channel, all right, and when that pops up, there's going to be one box, and it'll say U.S. history, and it'll have today's date. And if she clicks on that, she will see the live stream that is going right now. There will be a few seconds of delay. Yeah, wave if you like. There you go. Like I said, there's a few seconds of delay, but it will be a live stream, and she hasn't turned the volume off, so you can still hear my voice. All right. Here's a couple things I want you to keep in mind with this. Number one, that webcam back there has a multi-directional microphone, and it's pretty strong. Anywhere I'm at in this room, it's going to pick me up, which means anything you guys say, it will pick up. So watch what you say. All right, if you are desperate to yell out, "Oh, I hate this," then you're going to get picked up. So just, you have to whisper it, or just wait till you leave the class. No, but seriously, I will be letting your folks know that this is a tool, and I've had more than a few that have chimed in during a class period, and boy, I'd hate for them to hear the real language that comes out of your mouth. But I hear in the hallway every day. So just be mindful of that. But honestly, guys, why I do this? If you're sick, you could check in during the time of your class, and you can see what you're missing. Or if you need to go back and review, once I stop the stream, it'll save it on that YouTube channel. You'll be able to open that up and see what it is that we talked about, what it is that we covered. It's a review tool, I think, as well. Okay, so just be aware of that tool, and that it's going to be running. Anytime you see that blue light on, then we're streaming. All right, let's get to the discussion for today. Like I said, we are at Native Americans, and I want to move on now to discuss a little bit about the Europeans that are going to interact with them very shortly. Now, Ronnie, do you still have the live streaming up? Hold that back up for me real quick. I wanted to show one more thing. What I don't want is, if you're trying to follow along with some discussion, I don't want you to try to squint and see the board, because as Riley will probably tell you, you probably can't make anything out on that screen, right? All right. So what I will do when we have stuff like this, and here in a minute, Riley's screen is going to change. There we go. Give it a second. There we go. So it will change so that what you see on the screen is what you see up on the projection screen. So you're not going to have to worry about squinting or anything like that. You'll see what people would be seeing in the classroom. Cole? Huh? The streaming? Well, I didn't realize that it was a thing until a few weeks in, but I did it. Remember, YouTube forcibly deleted one of them. Yeah, but the screen share, I did that too, because YouTube got mad at me. YouTube got mad at me because I showed a video from YouTube. They actually shut down my entire website. It was kind of a big deal. They were a little over drama, but yeah, I felt like a criminal. So I've set there's ways around it. I'll have to keep those. All right. So as we go into these discussions, remember the live stream option. The other thing I would tell you too, and I think this is a routine that we ought to get used to. We don't do quizzes in here. If we do, it's going to be over something like we just did, something we talked about in class, we worked on together, just to make sure you got out of it what I wanted you to get out of it. We don't do quizzes after notes, though. Instead, what we do is we harness the use of social media, namely Twitter. Okay? And there's a method to my madness here. There's a reason why I think Twitter is a really useful tool for the classroom. But what I'll have you do, what I'll ask that you do every time we have one of these discussions, is I'm going to have you go back over the notes that you have taken. And what I'm asking you to look for is an important point, something that you think stands out as what you consider to be pretty key knowledge. Could be a name, could be a place, a date, or something that you think is just key that we covered. And I'll have you compose that into a tweet. We're not talking a book here. We're limited on characters. And send that out to the appropriate hashtag. Two things to keep in mind. Number one, this tweet needs to be factually correct. If we're talking World War II, and you tell me that Abraham Lincoln was president of the United States in World War II, we've got a problem. That's not right. That's not right. He was president during World War I. Right? No, right? Come on. Civil War. Okay, anyway. All right, so it needs to be factually accurate. If it's not, obviously there's not going to be any points awarded there, right? But beyond that, I'm not going to follow you on Twitter. And for the most part, I think students are happy. I know I am. It's just kind of weird. Right? I'm not going to follow you on Twitter. So when I go to look these over, I'm going to go to the appropriate hashtag. For us, it will be FHS, US for the class, and then P7. Make sure you put that P7 in there. I know it's a little bit of a longer hashtag, but I want it to just be us. I don't want it to be us and then a couple of people selling Ray-Ban sunglasses. Right? I want it to just be us at this hashtag. But the idea of it is that when we are done, maybe before a quiz or before a test, you can go to that hashtag. Let's be honest, most of you are on Twitter all the time anyway. Right? You can go to that hashtag and you will see what is basically a study guide all the way down. Now, I've had several students talk about using this as a review tool. It's kind of like we're making our own Quizlet deck. It's just that we're using a social media tool that most of you are using all the time anyway. Trying to be convenient and use something that you're not going to have to relearn or learn anew. It's something that most of you are pretty comfortable with. Right? Now, if you don't have Twitter, I am going to have to ask you to create one, and the only person you have to follow is me. All right? You don't have to follow anybody else. Your grade on these is not dependent on the number of followers you have. All right? Just making sure you have that tool so that you can get your points on this. 10 points a pop. If you forget to do one, is it the end of the world? No. If you don't do these several times, that's going to add up pretty quickly. So don't forget about this expectation. Are there any questions on these tweets? All right, with that in mind, I always get asked about extra credit. I told you about the extra journals. That's an option. I also, a lot of times, random times throughout the year, I'll shoot out a review question, and it will always come from the Klein's Classroom Twitter handle. First person to answer it back correctly gets a point of extra credit. The more of those you answer, the more points you get. You can get a total of 10 per 9 weeks. That could be an aid to you, something to help you out. I'm not going to turn in Kleenex. This is your Kleenex here. But you may want to turn on some notifications for that Twitter handle if you haven't done so already, so that you know when those get set up. All right, any questions? All right, then let's get rolling here. And we'll talk about, as much of this as we can. I don't have a ton to cover, but with 10, 15 minutes left, we won't get finished. We'll have to finish up tomorrow. But at least we can get started. And, when I approach this class, I look at it as a story. It is a story. And every story has to have a beginning. We've already looked at the early Native Americans. Now we look at the other group. The other group that is featured in this first chapter, and those are the Europeans. And when we talk about these Europeans and then making their way over to this new world, what will eventually become the United States, we have to start that story way back in 1453. That's got to be our starting point today. So the map that I've got up here shows, for the most part, what the non-American world would have looked like in 1453. Okay? Most, at that point, there are Native Americans living in the Americas. That is it. There are no Europeans in the Americas. What we have here is a relationship between Europe and Asia. And it's a relationship that is built on trade. Europe has become addicted to the stuff that is coming out of India and China. These are luxury things like spice, silk, tea. I mean, these are things that you can live without. But for Europe, they have become like Wi-Fi to us. We can live without Wi-Fi, but it's much better living if we have it. Okay? So that's kind of the relationship here. And most of those trade goods are moving up and down this red trade route that connects Europe to Asia. Anybody know what that trade route is called? Very good. Silk Road. And things are good. In fact, things are good for several hundred years. But in the midst of this is a war going on between Christians from Europe and Muslims in the Middle East. There are several of these wars, and they are more collectively known as what? Crusades. Very good. Crusades. And there's several of them. Most of them are fought so that somebody can control a town located right here, known as Jerusalem. The Christians take it over, then the Muslims come back and beat them, and they take it over. They go back and forth for 4 or 5 different crusades. And we're talking several hundred years of death. But 1453 is the last crusade. And by that point, the Muslims have beaten the Christians back. They now control this whole area, and the Muslims are moving north. And they're heading for a city right here. A city called Constantinople. And I think it can arguably be said that in 1453, Constantinople is the most important city in the world. And the reason why is because it is the doorway. It is the gateway between Europe and Asia. That's where the Silk Road goes. And when the Muslims take over that city, they shut that door. There will not be any more Europeans making their way.
Teachers Partner Center, Rushton, we need Jacob Harris. Please come to the office. Jacob Harris, please come to the office. Thank you.
There will not be any more Europeans coming this way to get any of those trade goods. So they have got 2 choices. Number 1, say goodbye to silk. Say goodbye to silk, say goodbye to spice, say goodbye to tea, say goodbye to it all. Or option 2, find a different way to get to China and India. And that is where our story begins. The first European country to look for a different way to get there is going to be Portugal. Portugal at this time is ruled by a guy named Henry, a guy that is so committed to exploring the world and sending out ships, committed to finding a different way to India and Asia, that he earns the nickname of Prince Henry the Navigator. And he's going to send out 3 groups of explorers to try and find a different direction by which that Portuguese sailors can get to China and India. And since the way east is closed, they decide to go south. Now, in 1453, Europeans knew that Africa was there. They just didn't know how big it was. In fact, if you looked at a map at that time, a map of Africa, you would have seen just a chunk of land surrounded by water, and the water was probably filled with drawings of dragons and sea monsters. I mean, that was the thought, that if you sailed south far enough, one of two things would happen to you. You would either sail off the earth, or you would be eaten by a dragon, or some other kind of sea monster. Well, Prince Henry says, man, I need my tea. We're going to risk the dragons. Sends out 3 expeditions. You can see them on the map. Each of those 3 gets Portugal a little bit closer to going around the coast of Africa. The first, or the middle one there, the gold one, that's the one in 1488. Bartholomew Diaz discovers 2 important things. Number 1, no dragons. We're good there. But number 2, he does make it around that southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. He runs out of supplies at that point, has to go back, but he can come back and say, hey, we can do this. We can do this. So a few years later, Henry sends out Vasco da Gama. That name may ring a bell. And he's the one who makes it. He's the green one. He makes it all the way around and lands in India and China. This opens up trade again. And this is a good deal for Portugal. Let's be honest. We're never going to talk about Portugal again. This is their moment to shine. And shine they do. 1504, Portugal is the wealthiest nation in Europe because of this. Now everybody else has got to play catch up. And the next country that's going to give it a shot is Spain. You know, they don't have things quite as easy as Portugal. First thing Spain has to do is get free. That's going to take some work because at this point, Spain is controlled by somebody else. They're controlled by a group of people known as the Moors. For those of you that took world history, this name rings a bell. The Moors were a name used to describe Muslims in the area. All right, take a look at the map up there. Shows you what Spain would have looked like at this point in time. This green area down here at the south, that's what the Moors, the Muslims, would have controlled. There you've got Portugal. So what we're going to see is right around 1400, Spanish are going to sweep down and kick the Muslims out, and we will finally have an actual Spain. All right, this is something known as the Reconquista. I don't know if you've talked about that in Spanish class, but that is Spanish for the reconquest. That's where they conquer, they gain Spain back. So now what they're focused on is, what do we need to do to become a power again? What do we need to do to catch up to Portugal? All right? And by 1492, we're going to see some new people in charge, a king and a queen named Ferdinand and Isabella. That name again, those 2 names are pretty famous. And they're going to send out a famous explorer. Who are we talking about?
An interruption for the
Very
afternoon
good.
announcements. Mr. Bates is having a golf meeting now. For those boys playing golf, please go with Mr. Bates for just a few minutes. Also, the following need to come to the office: Chesney Kerr, Ethan Rotund, Jack Melvin, Jacob Bright, Landon Bachman, Taylor Smith, Stone Porter, Cassidy Gibson, Hayden Lane, Nate Morlock, Caleb Cage, Jackson Shirley, Aaron Mitchell, Michael Armington. Thank you, and have a great evening.
All right, now I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Columbus. I mean, most of you know that story, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the old nursery rhyme. But it's enough to know at this point, before we finish up tomorrow, Columbus brings his 3 ships over. He thinks he lands in India. He really lands today in what would be the Dominican Republic. And he claims that land for Spain. No, it's not going to take a long time before the Spanish realize it's not India. It's a brand new world. And they turn their attention away from China and India and more towards what can we get from this new world. And they become especially interested when they start hearing stories of gold. All right? So when we pick up tomorrow, I'll need probably about 10 minutes. We'll finish up just a few things on Spain, a few things on England and France, and that will wrap things up with this review. and then we will turn our attention to bringing the two groups together. Native Americans, Europeans, what happens when they collide? How's that going to go? All right. We'll start that tomorrow. Thank you.